It was supposed to be a simple red-eye layover, the kind where you kill 3 hours walking circles around a terminal, drink burnt coffee, maybe buy a magazine you'll never read. My phone buzzed with a gate update. Boarding at C13. I blinked at it, then looked up at the overhead signs. C10, C11, C12, C14. No, C13. Just a gap, like someone had plucked it out of reality. I thought maybe I'd misread. Check the app again. C13, boarding in 40 minutes. My first thought was that this was one of those airport quirks, like skipping the 13th floor in hotels. But gates aren't floors. And besides, my ticket wasn't a superstition. It was real. I dragged my suitcase toward a row of chairs where a man in a reflective vest was mopping. He was humming to himself, slow, off-key. "Excuse me, do you know where C13 is?" He stopped mid-swipe, looked up at me as if I'd just asked him about a dead relative. "C13's sealed," he said finally. "Been sealed for years." I laughed a little, waiting for the punchline. "Sealed?" He nodded once, went back to mopping. "They put a wall over it after, well, best you just head to C12, miss." The thing about being half awake at midnight in an airport is that your brain doesn't always file warnings in the right place. I thanked him, wandered toward C12. But the whole time, my eyes kept scanning for anything, any doorway, that could hide an entire gate. I passed vending machines, a silent newsstand, rows of bolted-down chairs. The hum of the terminal lights felt louder here, almost like a low insect buzz in my ears. And then I noticed something odd. Small arrows painted low along the baseboard, faded almost to nothing. They weren't the standard airport graphics, just hand-painted little arrows pointing toward a dead-end corridor between C12 and C14. I should have gone to my seat at C12 and waited. But instead, I wheeled my bag down that narrow passage. The carpet changed under my feet, thinner, scratchier, like it hadn't been replaced in decades. The air smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, like old chewing gum left under a desk. Halfway down, the overhead announcements crackled. And then I heard it. My full name, first and last, spoken in that bright, professional airline tone. "Passenger, please proceed to gate C13 for immediate boarding. Final call." I stopped. My heart thumped once, hard. I hadn't given anyone my name since check-in. The cleaner couldn't have known it. And yet, the voice in the ceiling knew exactly who I was and exactly where it wanted me to go. I took another step toward the end of the corridor, where the light seemed to fade into a kind of shadow that didn't belong indoors. The hum of the lights was gone now. All I could hear was the sound of my suitcase wheels and my own breath, loud in the silence. The arrows were so faint I had to keep glancing down, afraid I'd lose them. They led me past a vending alcove with machines unplugged and dark, their glass fronts reflecting my face like a warped mirror. The air felt cooler here, as if the ventilation had been shut off years ago. My footsteps echoed in a way they hadn't in the main terminal. Shorter, sharper, like the space around me had grown smaller without me noticing. At the end of the narrow hall, a metal door stood ajar. It wasn't marked, just a sliver of darkness between chipped beige panels. I pushed it open, half expecting alarms to start blaring. But all that greeted me was a long service corridor lit by a few flickering bulbs. Somewhere deep in the shadows, something dripped in a slow, steady rhythm. That's when I saw it. Painted high on the wall in faded block letters, almost hidden behind a dangling cable, C13. The paint was cracked, peeling in curls, but the number was still there. Like a relic nobody bothered to erase. I stepped closer, tracing the outline with my eyes. The walls beyond curved into what must once have been a waiting area. Rows of metal-framed chairs sat in uneven lines, their vinyl seats split open to spill yellow foam. Dust lay over everything in a soft, undisturbed layer, except for one seat near the far corner. It looked clean, like someone had been sitting there recently. I told myself I'd look for a staff member, maybe even take a quick photo for the weird story this would make later. But before I could dig out my phone, the ceiling speaker above me crackled to life. "Passenger." The voice said my full name, each syllable crisp, deliberate. "Please proceed to gate C13 for immediate boarding." I froze, staring up at the battered speaker grill. It made no sense. This corridor wasn't even on the map. I'd passed 2 locked maintenance doors just to get here. My pulse was in my ears now. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I meant, swallowed by the stale air. No answer. Instead, the announcement repeated, slower this time, as if savoring my name. "Please proceed to gate C13. The clean chair in the corner seemed to wait for me, angled just slightly toward an unlit jetway door at the far end of the room. The kind of door you see at every gate, except the glass was so dark I couldn't tell if it led outside or into something else entirely. The urge to turn back wrestled with the strange pull of hearing my name in a place that shouldn't exist. My hand tightened on the suitcase handle, and I took one step toward that door. Just one. The carpet here was damp underfoot, and for a moment, I thought I heard the faint shuffle of someone else's footsteps, matching mine in the shadows ahead. The jetway door loomed ahead, its rectangular frame just visible in the half-light. There was no window to the outside, just a slab of darkness that seemed thicker than night air should be. I told myself it was just unlit tarmac, but my feet slowed anyway. The silence here wasn't like the rest of the terminal. It pressed against my eardrums, heavy and deliberate, as if the place was holding its breath. A figure stepped into view beyond the threshold, a flight attendant silhouette, all neat lines and pressed uniform. I couldn't make out her face, but I could see the curve of a smile, frozen too wide. Behind her, another crew member appeared, and another. They stood just inside the dark, side by side, their stillness unnatural, like mannequins posed in welcome. The nearest one raised a hand, beckoning me forward. I swallowed hard and rolled my suitcase closer, trying to hear anything beyond the dull thud of my heartbeat. The smell in the air shifted, faintly metallic, like rain on old coins. To the right of the doorway sat a ticket scanner on a narrow podium, its green light blinking. I slid my boarding pass from my jacket pocket, more to break the silence than anything. The paper felt damp, though my hands were dry. I held it under the scanner. No beep, just a dry mechanical click. I pulled the ticket back, tried again, click, again, click. The sound was steady, too steady, ticking like a metronome between my shallow breaths. A movement caught my eye. On the small manifest screen beside the scanner, a list of names scrolled slowly upward. I scanned them without thinking and stopped cold. I knew these names. Not from work, not from school, from headstones. My grandfather, an aunt I'd only met twice before she died. My mother's older brother, gone before I was born. All of them. And there, my own name, at the very bottom, the cursor blinking beside it, as if waiting to be confirmed. The nearest attendant took a step forward, her smile not shifting in the slightest. I couldn't see her eyes, but somehow I knew they were fixed on me. The others behind her tilted their heads in eerie unison, just a fraction, like they'd been given the same cue. I felt my knees lock. My grip on the suitcase handle had gone slick. Somewhere deep in the blackness beyond them, I thought I heard the faint roar of engines. But slower, deeper, almost like breathing. The scanner clicked again, and the cursor beside my name pulsed, brighter this time, as if urging me to make a choice. I stepped back. The smile on the attendant's face stayed exactly the same, but her fingers tightened, curling slightly, as though preparing to pull me forward if I took too long. I don't remember deciding to step back. Only the sudden awareness that my heel had lifted, the wheel of my suitcase tilting with it. One more click from the scanner, sharp as a nail in the silence. And then I turned. My breath came fast and shallow, the way it does when you've almost tripped in the dark. I didn't run, not exactly, but every muscle in my legs was primed for it. The carpet was softer on the way out, or maybe I was imagining it. I glanced over my shoulder once, just once, and saw the attendants still framed in the doorway, their silhouettes perfectly still, smiles unwavering. No one followed me, but I could feel them watching until I rounded the curve of the wall. The waiting area I'd passed before was different. The dust was gone. The clean chair was gone too, replaced by a stack of cardboard boxes labeled in black marker. Janitorial supplies. Seasonal decor. The peeling C-13 above the wall was missing entirely, painted over in dull beige. For a moment I wondered if I'd taken a wrong turn, but the narrow corridor back to the main terminal was there. Same faded carpet at my feet. When I stepped through, the hum of the lights returned like a held breath finally exhaled. The vending machines glowed cheerfully again. The voices of late-night travelers drifted in from somewhere near C-14. I could see the cleaner down the hall, pushing his mop in slow arcs, not looking at me. I found a seat at C-12, my hands still trembling as I opened the airline app. My gate number blinked once, then changed. C-12, boarding in 20 minutes. No mention of C-13, no history of the previous notification. Someone sat down beside me, close enough that our sleeves brushed. I didn't look at them, just kept staring at my screen. After a moment, they leaned slightly toward me and said, in a voice that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, "Good. You didn't board." I turned my head, but the seat was empty. A faint draft of cool air touched my cheek, like someone had just stood and walked away. When my real flight was called, I boarded without looking at the crew's faces. I buckled in, kept my eyes on the safety card, and tried not to think about the manifest, about the names and the blinking cursor. Somewhere in the back of my mind, though, I knew I hadn't just avoided a flight. I'd sidestepped something that didn't land, something that only ever collects. I booked the ride without thinking much about it. Just another late-night pickup after a long day, the kind where you're too tired to check much beyond the driver's name and rating. 5 stars, over 1,000 rides. The profile picture showed a man in his 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a dark winter cap. The snow outside was coming down in thick, slow flakes, and I was already picturing the heat blasting in the car, the relief of sinking into a warm seat. When the sedan pulled up, the make and plate matched exactly. The driver leaned across to unlock the door, and for a moment I thought, good. Everything checks out. But when he smiled as I slid into the back seat, something in that smile caught me off guard. Not the expression itself, but the way it seemed rehearsed. The heater was running, but not as high as I expected. Cold air clung to my legs, seeping up from somewhere under the seat. I glanced at the driver in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw his hands, bare, resting loosely on the steering wheel. No gloves, no visible shiver, just steady hands in the kind of cold that made my own fingers ache even inside my pockets. "Headed up to the lodge?" he asked, his tone casual, almost friendly. I nodded, muttered something about hoping the snow wouldn't get too bad. He chuckled under his breath, like he knew something I didn't. The phone in my lap lit up with a map, solid blue route line stretching into the hills. I always watch the little arrow move, half out of habit, half because I've read too many horror stories about rides gone wrong. For the first 10 minutes, everything looked fine. Then, without warning, the GPS blinked and the line shifted, rerouting us onto a smaller road. I checked the address. It was still the lodge, but now the ETA was longer. "Is this a detour?" I asked, leaning forward a little. "Road ahead's icy," he said, not looking away from the windshield. "This way's better. Quicker sometimes." His breath didn't fog the glass. Something in my chest tightened. I checked the app again, comparing the photo to the man in the mirror. Same face, same dark cap. And yet, I had the strangest feeling that I was looking at someone wearing that face. The way a mask fits too perfectly over skin. The wipers scraped across the windshield, smearing half-frozen slush. Outside, the snow swallowed the edges of the road, turning everything beyond the headlights into blank white. In the reflection of the glass, the driver's smile flickered back into place, like he'd remembered he was supposed to have it on. The GPS announced it before I saw it, recalculating, in a voice I didn't recognize. Not the calm female tone that had guided me through every other ride, but something lower, rougher, with a faint rasp, like it was coming through an old tape recorder. I glanced down at my phone, expecting to see a notification or a settings change, but the app was the same. Only the route had shifted. The blue line now traced a winding path over a thinner, grayer road I'd never noticed on the map before. It bent deep into the woods, far from the main highway, and the name of the road didn't appear at all, just a faint shadow of where it should be. I leaned forward. I thought the lodge was the other way. The driver's smile widened just slightly. "It is, but this way's familiar. We took it last time, remember?" I sat back, my pulse picking up. Last time didn't make sense. I'd never been here before. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," I said, keeping my tone light, as if correcting a harmless mistake. "No," he replied, almost cheerfully. "You were quieter then. Snow was heavier. I remember the way you looked out the window." I stared at the side of his face in the mirror, the curve of his cheekbone, the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. The way he said it wasn't like small talk. It was like reciting something he'd been waiting to repeat. Outside, the landscape shifted. Streetlights thinned out, replaced by tall black silhouettes of trees pressing close to the road. The snow seemed to fall slower here, heavier, the flakes turning in lazy spirals before touching the ground. My phone vibrated in my hand, but there was no new message. Just the faint pulse of the arrow moving along that ghost road. I zoomed out on the map, but the farther I pulled back, the less the road seemed to exist. Beyond a certain point, it vanished entirely, leaving the blue route line suspended over blank gray. I checked my signal, full bars. Checked the driver's dashboard phone. Its screen was black, though he hadn't touched it. How much longer on this route? I asked. Not long, he said, still smiling. You know the turn when you see it. My fingers tightened around my phone until my knuckles ached. The snow outside seemed to swallow sound, making the hum of the engine louder in my ears. In the glass, I saw his eyes flick up to meet mine in the rearview mirror. And for a split second, I wasn't sure they were the same color they'd been when I got in the car. The turn came so gradually, I almost missed it. A barely cleared strip veering off the narrow road, swallowed almost immediately by trees. The headlights caught the first mile marker, a short post half buried in snow, the numbers stamped in reflective paint. 0. I thought it was odd, but said nothing. Then, 10 minutes later, another marker appeared on the right side of the road. Same shape, same height, same crisp white 0 staring back at me. I leaned toward the window, trying to catch the details in the beam of the headlights. Another 10 minutes, another 0. My stomach tightened. Either the markers were wrong, or we were driving in some kind of loop. The driver broke the silence. You used to count the mile markers, he said. When you were little, you'd sit in the back seat tapping your knees, whispering the numbers to yourself. Got quiet after a while. Always quiet before the turn. My throat went dry. How would you know that? He smiled into the windshield. It's in your file. Before I could ask, his right hand left the wheel and tapped the glove box. Go ahead, look. I hesitated, then pulled it open. The cold air in the compartment smelled faintly of damp paper. Inside was a neat stack of printed sheets, ride receipts, each with the same 5-star rating and the same passenger name. Mine. Not just my first and last name, my full name, spelled exactly as on my passport. Below each was a brief review. Quiet as always. Knows the way now. Perfect passenger. I flipped through them, my hands trembling. The dates stretched back years, before I'd ever signed up for a rideshare account. Where did you get these? My voice came out sharper than I meant. They send them to me, he said, almost pleased. Proof I'm doing good work. Another mile marker slid past. 0. I closed the glove box and pressed my back against the seat. My phone's map still showed us on that unmarked road, the arrow inching forward but never changing position in relation to the tiny markers it displayed. Just a single dot, pulsing at 0. You've been here before, the driver said softly. You'll remember when we reach the end. Outside, the snow was falling thicker now, smearing into the dark like static. I gripped the door handle without thinking, the cold metal biting into my palm. The road ahead looked the same as the one behind. Black trees, white drifts, and another mile marker waiting in the glow of the headlights, already stamped with a perfect, endless 0. The trees began to thin, and for a moment I thought I saw a glow ahead. A sign of town, or at least a highway junction. The driver eased off the gas as the road widened into an open, wind-swept clearing. The snow whipped harder here, twisting in eddies that blurred the edges of everything. That's when I saw the stop sign. Its red surface was faded, the paint eaten away in patches. But the word in white letters was wrong. Not stop. Stay. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. Here we are, he said softly, almost to himself. I didn't wait to find out what here meant. I yanked the door handle and felt the rush of icy wind slam into me. My boots hit the snow, sinking to the ankle, the cold biting through the fabric in seconds. Behind me, the engine idled, a low growl under the howl of the wind. I staggered a few steps toward the clearing's edge, but the world beyond was just a shifting wall of white. No shapes, no landmarks. Then I heard it, the hiss of tires on packed snow. Headlights bloomed through the blizzard, growing brighter, closer. Another car slid into the clearing, its wipers fighting against the ice. It rolled to a stop nose to nose with the first car, the beams crossing and spilling into the snow between them. At first, I thought it was just another rideshare pickup. Same model, same dark paint. But then my eyes dropped to the plate. Same letters, same numbers. And the driver, he was there too. The same man, same face, same fixed smile. He looked at me through the glass with an expression that didn't change, even as the snow caked his windshield. I turned toward the first car. That driver, my driver, was still watching me from behind the wheel, hands resting exactly as before. The two of them were like reflections facing each other, waiting for me to pick a side. My pulse pounded in my ears. My phone was useless, a black slab in my glove. The cold was already working into my fingers, but the thought of getting back into either car made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the air. So I didn't. I turned away from both, pulling my scarf up over my mouth, and stepped into the white. The wind closed around me, erasing the sound of the engines, the shapes of the cars, even the red letters of the sign. Not every ride takes you somewhere. Some rides take you back, and I wasn't going back. By the time I found the hostel, the rain had worked its way through my jacket, my backpack straps, and possibly my will to live. The old stone streets were slick under the dim yellow glow of street lamps, each puddle reflecting a warped slice of the city. I ducked inside, shivering, and dropped my bag on the worn lobby carpet with a wet thud. The receptionist looked up from a paperback, her hair pulled into a loose knot, glasses slipping down her nose. "Rough night?" she asked. "You could say that," I said, peeling my hood back. She tapped at her computer for a moment, then slid a key card across the counter. "Room 6, she said automatically, then paused, her eyes flicking up to mine. "Oh, wait, that can't be right." I raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "We don't rent room 6. She gave a short, awkward laugh, like she was trying to make it a joke, but wasn't quite pulling it off. "System must have glitched. I'll put you in 4 instead." She tried again, but the printer only spit out another slip with room 6 in bold at the top. She frowned, tapped at the keyboard harder, muttered something under her breath. Finally, she shook her head and handed me the card. "All right. Well, just take this for now. The lock might not even work." The hallway upstairs smelled faintly of old wood and something damp, like a coat that had been left to dry but never quite managed it. Room numbers were painted directly on the doors in uneven black strokes. I passed 4, then 5. And there it was, 6. The paint on the number was a little darker, like it had been touched up recently. I tried the card, half expecting the light to flash red. It didn't. The lock clicked open with a soft, almost relieved sound. Inside, the room was plain, but clean enough. 2 bunks, a window rattling faintly in the wind, a small metal locker in the corner. I set my bag down and listened to the rain tap against the glass. No reason to make it creepy, I told myself. It's just a room. Still, as I unzipped my bag, I couldn't shake the thought of the receptionist's hesitation, the way her voice caught when she said they didn't rent this room, and the way the door had opened so easily, as if it had been waiting for me all along. I pulled the thin blanket over my legs and listened to the storm outside. trying to ignore the faintest creak from the top bunk. I hadn't noticed anyone else check in. By morning, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle, the kind that seemed to soak the city in a thin gray film. I woke to the sound of water running. Steady, rhythmic, like someone had left the shower on. For a moment, I was groggy enough to think I'd imagined it. But then I noticed the extra weight on the top bunk. A backpack, not mine. It was a weathered canvas pack, the kind you see in vintage travel photos, with frayed straps and patches sewn onto the sides, flags from countries I'd never been to. I froze halfway through, sitting up, listening for movement above me. Nothing but the muted hiss of the shower. "Hello," I called, my voice low, as though I might wake someone. No answer. I slipped my feet into my shoes and stepped into the narrow hallway that connected the dorm room to the small shared bathroom. The shower was still running, steam curling out from under the frosted glass door. I knocked lightly. "Sorry, just checking if you'll be long." Silence. No shuffle of feet, no clink of shampoo bottles. Just the water, rushing steady. I pulled the door open a crack, half expecting a startled voice or the glare of a stranger. The stall was empty. The water was blasting full heat, fogging up the mirror above the sink. I reached in to turn it off, my fingers prickling from the sudden heat against the chill of my skin. As the spray died, the steam drifted and thinned. And that's when I saw it. Letters emerging on the mirror, as if traced by an invisible finger. A name. Not mine, but one I knew. The letters curved into the full first and last name of someone I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had never even been to this city, let alone this hostel. The sight of it made the air in my lungs feel heavier, like I was breathing through wet cloth. I wiped at the mirror with my sleeve, smearing the condensation, but the letters didn't vanish entirely. They clung faintly to the glass, ghosting back into shape as soon as I stepped away. The backpack was still on the top bunk when I returned, but the room felt subtly different. Colder, as if someone had just stepped out and left the air behind them frozen. I sat on the lower bunk, staring at the bag, wondering if unzipping it would answer anything, or just confirm what my gut was already whispering. That whoever owned it hadn't walked through the door last night. That night, the rain returned in fits, hammering the windows and then retreating to a steady patter, like it couldn't decide how angry it wanted to be. I was lying on the lower bunk, reading on my phone, when the light above flickered once, twice, and went out. The glow from the street lamps barely reached through the thin curtains, leaving the room in a soft, restless dark. The top bunk creaked. It wasn't the random groan of wood settling. It was the deliberate shift of weight, a slow, cautious climb. The ladder rattled faintly. My breath caught, but I forced my eyes to the ceiling, as though I could ignore it, into disappearing. A shadow passed over me. The springs above compressed under a new weight, and then breathing. Steady, unhurried, just above my head. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the flashlight icon, but instead, I opened the hostel's number in my messages. Someone's in room 6 with me. My fingers were shaking, the screen blurring as I hit send. It felt like forever before the reply came. A single line. Room 6 is unassigned tonight. I read it twice, 3 times, the words losing meaning until they were just shapes. Above me, the breathing didn't change, didn't falter, as though whoever was up there couldn't hear the frantic beat of my pulse. My first thought was to run. My second was that I'd have to pass the ladder to reach the door. I lay perfectly still, listening to the rain, the breath, the soft scrape of fabric above me, like someone shifting position, settling in for the night. I typed another message. I can hear them. Should I come to the desk? No response. The typing bubble never appeared. The mattress above sagged suddenly, pressing closer to my face, as if the person on top had leaned over the edge. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to move, to get out. But my legs felt weighted, the dark of the room pressing in like a second blanket. The breathing deepened, almost a sigh, and for a moment I thought I heard a faint whisper threaded into it. Too low to catch the words, but close enough that I could feel them against my ear. My phone buzzed once. A blank message. Just empty space where letters should have been. And then, above me, the bunk shifted again, as though whoever was there had decided they weren't done getting comfortable. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I opened my eyes, the room was colder. Not just cool from the rain seeping through the thin glass, cold, like a breath held too long. The street outside was silent, the storm having passed, and in that heavy stillness, I could hear every sound in the room. My own breathing, the faint creak of the bunk frame. And then, without warning, the mattress above gave way with a wet, sucking sigh. I bolted upright, my head knocking against the slats, and scrambled back. The top bunk had collapsed in the middle, forming a deep hollow, the fabric darkened with spreading wetness. A smell hit me, briny, metallic, like the underside of a pier at low tide. Seawater. I stared, frozen, as droplets slid from the dented mattress, pattering onto the floor in slow, deliberate beats. It wasn't a lot of water, but enough to form a shallow, dark pool that reflected the dim light from the hallway. The air tasted faintly of salt, and something older. Something that had been trapped a long time before finding its way here. No one was there. Not a scrap of clothing, not the canvas backpack, not even the sound of footsteps retreating. Just the dent, as if something heavy had lain there moments ago, and the water seeping into the warped wood. I grabbed my bag without bothering to zip it and yanked the door open. My socks slapped against the stairs as I half ran, half stumbled to the lobby. The receptionist was behind the desk, head bent over her book. But when she saw me, her face shifted instantly from boredom to something tight and weary. "You were in 6, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I dropped the key card on the counter. Yeah, and I gestured at myself, at the saltwater smell clinging to my clothes. What the hell is wrong with that room? She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled open the till and slid a small stack of bills across the counter. Cash refund, for the night. Her fingers lingered on the money a moment before letting go. And, please, don't leave a review. I stared at her. Why? Her eyes flicked to the hallway behind me, then back. Some rooms aren't haunted, she said softly. They're hungry. I took the money without another word. The bills were damp, edges curling as if they'd been left out in the rain. Outside, the street was empty, the city still slick from the storm. But even blocks away, I swore I could still hear the faint drip of water onto warped floorboards, echoing in my ears. The mountain air had that crisp, fading light feel to it. Sun slipping behind the peaks, shadows stretching like they were in no hurry to end the day. I'd come here on a whim, following a hand-painted sign pointing toward the last ride of the evening, blue ticket holders only. The funicular station looked like something out of a faded postcard. paint peeling on the wooden beams, a brass bell hanging above the ticket window. The clerk was an older man, with skin like worn leather, his eyes sharp but tired in the way of someone who had been here longer than the walls themselves. I slid my blue ticket across the counter, and he didn't glance at the price or the print. Instead, he took out a heavy, antique punch and impressed it into the corner. When I looked down, it wasn't the neat hole I expected. It was a strange little symbol, a shape that didn't match any letter or number I knew. Almost like a curling spiral, sharp at the end. "What does this mean?" I asked. He smiled without showing his teeth. "Just a reminder you're going up." The cable car itself gleamed faintly in the last light, its metal sides reflecting the mountain's orange glow. But when I stepped inside, my breath caught. The interior didn't match the platform at all. This wasn't the clean, modern refurb I'd seen from outside. The wood paneling was worn smooth by decades of hands, the brass fittings dulled, the seat cushions patched with mismatched fabric. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke and lavender soap. I ran my fingers over the windowsill. The paint there was chipped enough to show layers, cream over green over a deep red that must have been decades old. The clerk didn't board with me. Instead, he gave the brass bell a single sharp ring, and somewhere above, the pulley began its slow, rhythmic whine. The cable hummed under the floor, a deep vibration that settled into my bones. As the car began to rise, the station below slipped from view, replaced by the steep face of the mountain and the scattered glimmer of lights from the town far below. I told myself it was just the charm of old machinery, the odd quirks of a place too remote to bother modernizing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into someone else's time, and that the strange punch mark on my ticket was less about fare and more about permission. Or maybe ownership. The cable car groaned as it climbed, the view opening into swaths of forest, broken by streaks of snow. I was expecting the slow, steady ascent to the summit. But somewhere around the halfway mark, the rhythm changed. The hum in the cable deepened. The pulley whine faltered. And then we stopped. Through the fogged glass ahead, a small platform emerged from the mist, barely wider than the car itself. The sign above it was hand-painted, its letters so faded they looked like ghost impressions. I leaned closer to read it, but the fog clung stubbornly to the wood. What struck me first wasn't the station. It was the people standing on it. A family of 4. A man in a neat gray suit with narrow lapels, a woman in a pale floral dress with gloves, and 2 children, one holding a battered teddy bear, the other gripping the edge of her mother's skirt. Their clothes weren't just old-fashioned, they were perfectly, immaculately 1960s. The man's hair was slicked back, his hat tucked under his arm. The woman's shoes were polished to a dull shine. Everything about them felt like a photograph come to life, except for their eyes. They were fixed on me, unblinking. I sat back, telling myself they were just locals dressed up for some themed event. The mountains were full of quirky little traditions like that. Then the boy stepped forward, pressing his small hand against the glass. His breath hit the pane in a quick burst, leaving a patch of fog. Slowly, the others joined him, until all 4 were leaning close enough that their breath condensed together, clouding my view. The girl's teddy bear dangled limply, its button eye missing. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the thick pane. Something clanged on the roof of the car, a single sharp tap, like a hook striking metal. I twisted in my seat, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. When I looked back, The family had stepped away from the glass. They stood perfectly still on the platform, framed by the mist, watching. The cable car shuddered under my feet. Somewhere above, a bell rang twice. Sharp, impatient. Without a sound from the operator, the car began to move again, leaving the platform and its silent occupants to vanish into the fog as if they had never been there. I pressed my palm to the seat beside me and felt it, still faintly warm, as though someone else had been sitting there only moments ago. The fog outside thickened until the windows turned into pale, moving walls. The cable hummed steadily, but there was an undercurrent, something that didn't sound mechanical, almost like a low breath traveling through the metal. Then, a faint silhouette emerged below, rising toward me. The other funicular car, the counterweight, was on its way down. At first, I felt a strange comfort. I'd read once that these old systems balanced each other, one going up while the other came down, a simple exchange of weight. Seeing the other car meant someone else was out here too. But as it drew closer, my comfort turned into cold dread. The passengers inside didn't move like travelers. They were lined up along the windows, facing me, each one with a pale, almost grayish complexion. Their eyelashes and eyebrows glittered with frost, as if they'd been caught in a blizzard. And their lips, blue-tinged, were moving in unison. It took me a second to realize what they were mouthing. The words weren't random. They were saying it over and over. "Don't come up." One man pressed his hand to the glass as we passed, and his palm left a perfect frost print, spreading outward like ice on a pond. The cars were side by side for only a few seconds, but it felt longer. Too long. Long enough for me to see the last row, where a little girl sat alone. She wasn't mouthing the warning. She was staring directly at me, her small hands folded in her lap. And then, slowly, she shook her head. I flinched as a loud clang echoed through the cabin, the conductor's brass bell hanging above the entry. But there was no conductor here. The bell swung once, twice, 3 times, all on its own. Then it stopped. A pause, long enough for my heart to catch up. And then it started again, this time with a steady, deliberate rhythm, like a countdown. 5, 4, 3. Each strike reverberated through the wood and metal, and with each one, I felt a subtle lurch in the floor beneath me, as though the cable strained harder. 2, 1. The bell fell silent. The fog outside thinned for just a heartbeat, and in that brief window, I saw something impossible. The summit station was empty, but the cable kept pulling me upward, toward something else above it, something hidden in the clouds. The final stretch felt longer than the whole ride combined. The incline grew steeper, the fog heavier, and yet the car pressed on. My fingers curled around the door handle, though I knew it was locked. The air inside the cabin tasted metallic now, like old coins. And then, with a jolt, we stopped. The summit platform loomed beyond the glass. But something was wrong. There was no ticket clerk, no hum of machinery, no smell of coffee drifting from the cafe I'd glimpsed before boarding. The snow here was deep, untouched, piled high against the rails as if no one had arrived in years. The cabin door didn't open on its own. I had to force it, the hinges groaning, ice breaking away in flakes. My boots sank into the snow as I stepped onto the platform. The sound was swallowed instantly. No wind, no birds, no distant chatter from hikers. Just stillness. The station building stood where it should, but the paint was peeled to gray wood, windows boarded or broken. I pushed the main door, half expecting it to resist. But it swung inward too easily. Inside, the ticket counter was nothing but a warped plank of wood, dust thick on its surface. The air smelled faintly of rot. And on the wall behind it, rows of nails hammered into cracked plaster, hung dozens of funicular tickets. They were old, their colors faded, edges curling. Each one was stamped with the same symbol the clerk had punched into mine. My eyes scanned the rows, the names scribbled faintly on the backs. Some I could still read. Others had been worn away entirely. And then I saw it. My blue ticket, the ink still fresh, my name in my own handwriting. Nailed to the wall among the rest, as if it had been there for decades. A wave of dizziness swept over me. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, my breath clouding in the icy air. The floorboards creaked, not behind me, but from somewhere deeper in the station. I didn't wait to see what made the sound. I bolted back to the platform, crunching through the snow toward the car. But the cabin was gone. The rails stretched empty down into the fog. I stood there, staring into the white, my ticket still hanging behind me like a pinned insect. They say time in the mountains moves differently. But here it doesn't move at all. And if a place is patient long enough, it becomes a trap. It was the kind of market you only find if you're not looking for it. Half hidden in an alley that smells like rain and fried dough, with tarps strung between buildings so close they blot out the sky. The air pulsed with heat from open woks, the clink of coins, the murmur of bargaining in 10 different languages. I drifted past stalls selling lacquered masks, jars of herbs that smelled of pepper and ash, stacks of VHS tapes with no labels. And then I saw it. A pendant lying in a square of yellow silk. A simple bronze disc, except for the center, where an opal eye stared up at me. Not painted, an actual iridescent stone cut to look disturbingly alive. The vendor was an old man with fingers stained green from metalwork. When I asked the price, he smiled, showing teeth too perfect for his age. "No cash," he said, shaking his head. "No card. Only what you won't miss." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Like a trade?" He nodded once. "Something small. Something you can give without feeling the gap." The crowd pressed around us, and the smell of sizzling garlic made my head light. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through old voicemails, mostly junk. There was one from years ago, my college roommate drunk and singing off key. I never listened to it anymore. Without thinking too hard, I hit delete. The vendor's eyes flicked to my thumb as if he'd seen it happen. He pushed the pendant toward me. I picked it up, and for a moment I thought the opal shifted under my gaze the way a cat's eye catches light. It was cool against my palm, but warmer than metal should be. As I slipped it into my pocket, he reached into a drawer and dropped something else into my paper bag. A second pendant, smaller, darker, the stone inside faintly pulsing like a heartbeat. "That one is for you," he said quietly. "No charge." I opened my mouth to ask why, but the stall behind me erupted in laughter, the sound startling me into stepping aside. By the time I turned back, the old man was helping another customer, as if I'd never been there. The crowd swallowed me again, and I walked on with the weight of both pendants in my pocket. Somewhere between the spices and the incense, I realized. I couldn't remember my college roommate's face, not just the drunk voicemail. The whole face was gone. By the time I reached the end of the market street, the second pendant was warm enough that I could feel it through the paper bag. Not heat, exactly, more like the throb of blood under skin. I ducked beneath a string of red lanterns and pulled it out. The opal at its center was darker than the first, flecked with deep green and black, and when I held it to my ear, God help me, it pulsed in time with my own heartbeat. I slipped both pendants into my palm, one cold, one alive. The crowd pressed close on all sides, yet I suddenly felt like I was walking alone. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down at the screen. A name lit up, someone I knew well, or should have. I stared at the contact photo, a blurry figure with an arm slung over my shoulder. But their face, it was wrong. Smooth, unfinished, like an artist had abandoned the sketch halfway. The more I tried to focus, the harder it became. A gap was spreading in my memory, eating away at details. The sound of their laugh, the shape of their hands, the way they said my name. I stopped in the middle of the alley, the crowd splitting and flowing around me like water around a stone. My chest tightened. I turned back toward the pendant stall, weaving through the press of bodies. The layout of the market shifted with every turn. Stalls I remembered had vanished, replaced by others selling goods I swore weren't there minutes ago. The smell of sizzling food was sharper now, laced with something metallic. I caught sight of a woman chopping vegetables, her blade hitting the board in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the pendant's beat in my palm. When I finally reached the spot where the vendor had been, it was gone. The yellow silk, the bronze charms, the old man with the green-stained fingers, erased. In their place stood a boy of maybe 12, his eyes the color of smoke. He glanced at the pendant in my hand and grinned without surprise. "Be careful with that one," he said. "It's not yours yet." "What does that mean?" I demanded. But my voice felt strange in my throat, like speaking underwater. The boy just shrugged and turned to serve another customer. The market noise swelled until I couldn't hear my own thoughts. The pendant's beat quickened, and with each pulse, another detail of my friend slipped away. By the time I stumbled back into the main street, the face was gone completely, replaced by a blank, aching space that felt like it had always been there. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the pendant's pulse filled the darkness, slow and steady at first, then quickening until it felt like my own heart was trying to match it. By morning, the name of my friend, whatever it had been, was gone completely. It wasn't just forgetting. It was as if they had been edited out of my life, leaving behind only the faint ache of something I'd once cared about. I went back to the market. This time I went straight to the alley where I'd first seen the vendor, determined to give the pendants back and walk away. But the stall wasn't there. The space was now taken by a man selling bright parrots in 2 small cages. Their eyes followed me as I asked if he knew where the bronze charms had gone. He shook his head slowly, almost sadly, as though I should already know better. I wandered deeper, the market folding in on itself, stalls rearranging when I looked away. The smell of frying oil was gone, replaced by incense so thick it made my tongue taste like ashes. I heard the rhythmic chop of a knife again, but when I followed the sound, it came from a woman cutting strips of red cloth, not vegetables. Then I saw him, the boy from before, standing in front of a stall draped in black. The pendants hung from hooks like caught fish, their stones winking in the dim light. I pushed through the crowd and slammed the warm, pulsing one on the counter. "I want to return it," I said. My voice came out sharper than I meant, but my hands were shaking. The boy looked down at the pendant, then back at me, a slow smile curling his mouth. "No refunds," he said softly. We can swap, though. For something louder. The lights above us flickered, and I realized. Every bulb in sight was blinking in time with the pendant's beat. The sound of the crowd faded, replaced by that steady rhythm echoing inside my skull. What does that mean? Louder? I asked. But I already had a feeling I didn't want the answer. He leaned forward. Something you still hear when you're awake. Something that stays with you. His eyes were very dark, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes moving in them. Faces, maybe, pressed against glass. I took a step back, but the market seemed to press closer, the crowd swaying as if drawn to the pendant's heartbeat. Every flicker of the lights made the shadows stretch longer, curl around my feet. The boy's smile widened. You've already paid once, but if you want this gone, you'll have to pay again. I don't know what made me say it. Maybe the way the boy kept staring, maybe the pulse of the pendant pushing against my palm like it was alive. But I heard myself whisper, I'll give you something else. The boy tilted his head, curious. Something louder? My throat felt dry. My fear, I said, from the time I almost drowned. The memory rose before I could stop it. The weight of water pressing me down, lungs screaming, the light above me shrinking to a pale coin I couldn't reach. The moment I realized I wasn't going to make it, that the world would close over me forever. I had carried that fear for years, in dreams and in sudden jolts when my head went under. The boy nodded once, sharply, as if we'd made a deal without needing more words. He pushed a shallow ceramic bowl toward me, filled with clear water that smelled faintly of salt. Breathe it in here, he said. I lifted the pendant over the bowl. It was warm, fever warm. Its beat quick and frantic now, like it knew. I took one deep breath, let the memories sharpen in my mind until I could taste the panic again, then exhaled slowly into the water. My breath clouded it for a moment. Then the pendant slipped from my fingers, landing with a soft splash. The beat stopped, not slowed, stopped like a clock whose spring had snapped. The water stilled instantly, flat as glass. Around us, the market noise faded to nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no rustle of cloth. Even the air felt suspended, heavy. People in the crowd had turned toward us, not moving, not blinking, as if the act of breathing out my fear had taken something from them too. The boy reached into the bowl, it and lifted the pendant by its chain. It hung limp, the opal now dull, cloudy. He placed it in my hand. The memory's gone, he said, and so is the price you paid before. I searched my mind, and yes, my friend's face was there again, clear and whole. Relief washed through me so sudden it left me dizzy. But underneath it was something stranger, the absence of the fear I had carried for so long. It was like a missing tooth. My tongue kept searching for it, finding only the smooth gap. The market slowly exhaled. Sound returned in small pieces. A murmur, a shuffle of shoes, the sizzle of oil. The boy smiled, already turning to the next customer. I walked away clutching the cold pendant, its weight oddly comforting now. And I realized, out here, you always pay in a currency you don't know you have. It was the kind of dusk that turns everything the color of old coins. Lake, sky, the wooden ferry ramp under my boots. I'd missed the afternoon crossing, and the ticket office was just a weathered shed with its windows shuttered. Only a single sign hung crooked beside the ramp, hand-painted in flaking red. Last crossing except stories, not fares. I stood there a moment, thinking it was a joke for tourists. But the water was empty, except for one low black ferry bobbing in the distance. The engine grumbled like it was older than the lake itself. When it finally nosed up to the dock, I noticed there was no one queued to board. Just me. The captain was a small man with a cap pulled low, his eyes hidden in shadow. He didn't ask for a ticket, just motioned for me to come aboard with a hand that looked like driftwood. I stepped onto the deck, and the boards creaked under my weight like they hadn't been stepped on in years. We pushed off into the still water. The shoreline thinned into nothing but reeds and black trees, their roots swallowed decades ago when they flooded the valley to make the reservoir. Somewhere under us, the stories went, lay the remains of a village. Church, school, houses, all preserved in the cold dark. And somewhere down there, a bell still hung in the drowned church tower, ringing when the wind was right. I leaned on the rail, watching the ripples stretch out into the gray. That's when I heard it. One long, deep toll, too slow for a buoy, too heavy for anything but a bell. It came from far below, and it made my teeth ache. The captain didn't look up from the wheel. "It's calling for a story," he said. His voice was low, like he was afraid to wake something. "You pay with a story. That's the crossing." I laughed, but it came out thin. "What happens if I don't tell one?" He shrugged, and for a moment the ferry tilted, just enough to make my stomach drop. "Then you don't get across." The light was fading fast, and the far shore seemed no closer than when we'd left. I glanced over the side and thought, just for a second, that I saw the curve of a tiled roof under the water, pale and swaying with the current. I opened my mouth to speak, not sure yet what story I'd give, but knowing I didn't want to find out what happened if I stayed silent. The bell sounded again, closer now, and the captain finally looked at me. "Better make it true," he said. The second toll came from directly beneath us, so close it felt like the deck vibrated under my boots. It was impossible. There was nothing under this hull but 30 meters of black water and, if the old maps were right, a flatbed of silt. No tower, no bell. I stepped to the rail, squinting over the edge. The water was the color of smoked glass, calm on the surface, but with a slow pulse radiating outward. Perfect rings, as if the lake itself had taken a breath and exhale. The captain joined me, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. "Funny thing," he said, eyes fixed on those ripples. "They took the tower down before the flooding. Dynamite. Bricks scattered for half a mile. So, whatever's ringing now." He trailed off, as if the rest didn't need saying. I became aware we weren't alone anymore. 3 other passengers had appeared, or maybe I just hadn't noticed them before. They were spaced along the benches. An elderly woman in a headscarf, a young man with windburned cheeks, and a girl no older than 16 hugging a paper bag to her chest. None of them spoke, but their eyes were heavy on me, expectant. The woman broke the silence first. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in days. "My boy drowned here. 1978. I was the one who dared him to swim across." She let out a dry laugh, but her hands twisted the fabric in her lap. As she spoke, the lake's surface smoothed, the little waves flattening into a glassy sheet. The young man followed, his words clipped. "I stole from my father, the night before he died. He never knew it was me. I never told him. He looked at his boots after that, as if the confession had cost him something. Another toll from beneath, slow, satisfied." The girl inched forward, eyes darting between us. "I wished for my sister to get sick," she whispered. And then she did. She never got better. With each confession, the air felt warmer, the wind easing until the only sound was the ferry's engine and that impossible bell. The captain glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. I realized this was my turn, that the calm, the progress of the crossing, depended on it. The water's pulse beneath us seemed to wait, patient but insistent. I swallowed, the taste of lake air heavy on my tongue. My truth sat there in my chest, sour and cold, the one I never told anyone, not even myself. The captain didn't rush me. "The bell isn't really down there," he murmured. "It's in your throat. You'll feel better once you let it ring." The fog had been our ceiling since we left shore, thick, muffled, like the world beyond the rail had ceased to exist. Then, without warning, it tore open. I don't mean it thinned. I mean it parted, like someone had drawn back two curtains, and through that sudden gap, the lake revealed its impossible truth. Rooftops. They jutted from the water at odd angles, shingles slick with algae, chimneys crumbling under decades of storms. A weather vane spun lazily on one, though I couldn't feel a hint of breeze. I recognized the shape of the steeple immediately, even though half of it was gone. Photographs in old guidebooks had burned it into my brain. This was the drowned village. This was the story the locals whispered about over drinks. And it was breathing. The water rose and fell, subtly around those roofs, as if the whole place was floating just beneath the surface. Something shifted beside me. It was the girl with the paper bag, her eyes locked on one particular house. 2 stories, paint stripped to gray, a black square of a window staring right at us like an empty socket. She stepped closer until her shoulder touched my arm, and without looking away from that window, she said, "Tell it." Her voice was small, but it cut through me. I don't know what you mean." "You do," she replied, and now she looked at me, her pupils blown wide. "It's in there. That's where it stays unless you tell it." She pointed toward the black window. The bell beneath us tolled once, low and patient. I felt my throat close up. The words were already in my head, lined up like prisoners waiting to be released. It was a memory I kept locked so deep, I'd almost convinced myself it had never happened. Summer, years ago. River water cold enough to steal your breath. My best friend slipping off the rock, hitting the current hard. I saw his face once, mouth open, eyes wide, and I froze. Not for a second, not for a beat, but for long enough that the current carried him under. By the time my body moved, he was gone. I had told everyone I dove in right away. I had told myself. But the truth was, I froze. I stayed still. I let him go. The girl kept staring, waiting for me to say it out loud. The bell rang again, louder this time, and the roofs seemed to tilt toward us. The black window yawned wider. I could smell damp wood and something sweet turning rotten. My hands gripped the ferry rail. I knew the moment I spoke it, something in this lake would change, and maybe so would I. The words came out quieter than I expected, barely more than a breath, but they seemed to echo across the water. I told it, every second of it. The cold, the face, the stillness, the lie. And then the bell stopped. Not faded. Stopped. One moment it was there, deep and resonant under the hull. The next, only silence pressed against my ears. The girl gave a single nod, like she'd been the one waiting for a verdict, and stepped back. The black window in the drowned house didn't close, didn't move, but the water around it began to still. The rooftops lowered with the slow grace of a sinking ship. slipping beneath the surface until only the ripples remained. Then, even those were gone. The fog folded back over the lake. The ferry's engine rumbled, and I realized I had no memory of it starting. The captain stood at the wheel, eyes fixed forward, as if nothing at all had happened. No one spoke on the return crossing. Passengers kept their gazes down or out at the blank curtain of mist, as though speaking might wake something that preferred to stay under. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, but it wasn't from the cold. It was from the strange lightness in my chest, like some weight I hadn't known I carried was finally gone. When the dock came into view, the air felt heavier, more solid. I stepped onto the ramp, and my boots landed with a wet, sucking sound. I glanced down. Thick, gray silt clung to the treads, packed into every groove. It smelled faintly metallic, like old blood left in water too long. The captain handed me my ticket stub without a word. Only, it wasn't the same as before. The paper was softer now, water-warped. Across its face, in red block letters, it read, "Paid in full." I turned to ask him what it meant, but the ferry was already pulling away. The girl was gone. The other passengers scattered up the narrow road that led away from the pier. No one looked back. I stood there for a long time, the damp ticket in my palm, the mud dripping from my shoes onto the weathered boards. The lake was perfectly still, like glass, hiding everything that had surfaced just minutes ago. The locals say the ferryman doesn't take money. He takes what you've been carrying, the thing you'd never give up unless you had no choice. And maybe that's true? Because some ferries don't carry bodies, they carry weight. The bus hissed to a stop in the middle of nowhere, its headlights casting long, sickly beams across a squat concrete hut. Beyond it, only darkness and the low growl of a diesel generator. The air smelled of cold metal and damp asphalt. A man in a dark jacket stepped into the beam of the bus's lights, his reflective armband flashing with every move. He wasn't barking orders or waving his arms like I'd seen at other crossings. Instead, he climbed the steps of the bus slowly, almost like a guest invited aboard. "Papers, please," he said, voice soft enough that I had to lean forward to catch it. His eyes, pale, unblinking, settled on me. "And any memories that don't belong to you?" For a second, I thought he was joking, and a few people chuckled nervously. But he didn't smile. The bus had gone silent except for the faint hum of the heater. I pulled my passport from my jacket pocket, hesitating just a fraction too long. His gloved hand closed around it before I could speak. He flipped it open, eyes flicking over the stamps, the photo, the details. But somehow, it felt like he was reading me instead of the page. "Step off the bus for a moment," he said, still polite, still calm. He moved down the aisle, collecting documents from the others. But his attention kept sliding back to me like a compass needle finding north. Outside, the air was sharper. The night so quiet I could hear the dog's slow panting before I saw it. A German shepherd sitting beside the hut, eyes fixed on me. Its breath smoked in the cold air, but it didn't growl, just watched. The officer handed my passport back, but didn't release it right away. "You've been carrying something," he said. "A memory that isn't yours. We need to check it before you proceed." I opened my mouth to protest, to ask what the hell he meant. But the words caught somewhere in my throat. Because as he said it, something inside me twitched. A flash, like a still frame in an old reel. A street I didn't recognize. Smoke. Shouting in a language I'd never spoken. My hands, someone else's hands, reaching for a fallen rifle. The officer nodded like I'd just confirmed something for him. "You'll come with me now." He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. The dog rose without a sound and padded alongside as he led me toward the hut. Behind me, the bus idled, engine rattling in the cold. No one called out. No one asked if I was coming back. And in that moment, I wasn't sure I could answer them. Inside the hut, the air was warmer but stale, thick with the smell of old coffee and damp wool. A single desk lamp cast a yellow cone over a clipboard, a radio, and a steaming mug. The officer gestured for me to sit in a metal chair that scraped loudly against the concrete floor. He sat opposite, setting my passport down between us like an anchor. His gloves made a soft creak as he laced his fingers together. "Let's start with something simple," he said. "Tell me where you were born." I told him. He nodded, writing it down in quick, tidy strokes. "And your first memory?" It was an odd question, but I answered. Me on my grandfather's lap, holding the steering wheel of his old truck while we bounced down a dirt road. The officer smiled faintly. "That's yours," he said, almost to himself. "Now, let's look at the others." The lamp seemed to flicker, though I didn't hear the bulb buzz. He asked me to describe my earliest school, my first pet, my first job. Each answer felt like it was being weighed. Then, without warning, his voice shifted. "And what about the night the street collapsed in front of you?" My mouth went dry. I had no such memory, until I did. I was there, standing in a narrow alley, the air split by sirens, my skin sticky with sweat and grit. Bricks tumbled in slow motion, and through the dust I saw faces I didn't know, mouths open in silent terror. A soldier pushed past me, shouting orders in a language I didn't speak. But somehow I understood every word. I blinked, and the hut was back around me. The officer was watching closely, pen unmoving. "That," he said, "is not yours." The door creaked open, and the German shepherd padded in, nails clicking on the floor. He came straight to my chair and sat, posture perfect, eyes fixed not on me but on my bag at my feet. "What's in there?" the officer asked. "Clothes, a book, my phone charger." My voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. He leaned forward, picking up my passport, turning it over in his hands. "Memories hitch rides? They travel better than people do. Sometimes they get left behind at borders like this. Sometimes they hide in things." The dog's stare didn't waver. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "I'm going to ask you one more time," the officer said, his tone still maddeningly calm. "What are you carrying that doesn't belong to you?" And before I could stop it, that other voice, the one from the alley, whispered an answer in my head. They moved me into another room without a word. The kind that doesn't bother pretending to be welcoming. Just 4 concrete walls, no windows, and a humming in the air that I first thought was the heating system. But it wasn't heat. It was a steady, low vibration, the kind that buzzes against your teeth and settles deep in your chest. In the center sat a single chair, bolted to the floor, wide padded headrest curving behind it like some dentist's nightmare. Cables hung down from the ceiling in limp bundles, their ends tipped with metal caps. The hum seemed to be coming from inside the chair itself, like something was alive in it. The officer closed the door softly and leaned his back against it. "We don't have a lot of time," he said, and his voice was different now, less formal, almost weary. "You're carrying something that isn't yours, but that's not why I brought you here." I stayed standing. My legs didn't trust the chair. Then why? He looked past me, eyes on the chair. Every so often we get someone like you. Someone who's mixed. You've got your own life in there, but also a hitchhiker's worth of other people's pieces. Normally, we just sort it out. But tonight, there's a choice. He stepped forward, and the hum in the room seemed to sync with his words. I can let you go. I can let everyone on that bus go. No searches, no seizures, no questions. But it's not free. I didn't like where this was going. What's the price? A memory, he said simply. One that's yours. One you'd fight to keep. I laughed, a single, sharp sound. You want to steal from me? Not steal, trade. You put it in the chair, it's gone forever. You'll never know it existed. You'll never feel the gap. But it will be used, stored, sometimes even given to someone else. He shrugged. Or you can keep it. But then I'll have to do my job, and I can promise you, not everyone on that bus makes it through that kind of inspection. The hum was louder now, or maybe my ears were ringing. I thought about the bus. Faces half asleep under dim lights, a couple holding hands, the old man with a paper bag on his knees. I thought about what would happen if I said no. The officer tapped the headrest. Sit down when you're ready. Don't take too long. I stared at the chair, and then I thought of the one thing I couldn't stand to lose, and knew that was exactly what he wanted. I don't remember standing up. One moment I was staring at the chair, the next I was lowering myself into it. The padding oddly warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. The cables swayed slightly, though no one had touched them. The officer adjusted one beside my head, his fingers surprisingly gentle. Think about it, he said quietly. Hold it as clearly as you can. When you're ready, let it go. At first, my mind skittered between memories like a stone skipping water. Birthdays, rainy afternoons, road trips. But one stayed. One anchored itself. The happiest day of my life. It was sunlight through trees, gold on skin, laughter that came from somewhere deeper than lungs, the smell of rain still in the grass, a hand in mine, warm and sure. I could feel it all. Texture, temperature, weight, every detail a thread, weaving me back to who I was then. The hum from the chair began to rise, just a fraction, and I felt the edges of that day start to fray. The colors dulled first, then the sound. The weight of the hand slipped from mine. Wait, I whispered. But the officer didn't answer. He just kept watching, eyes fixed on my face. And then the day was gone. Not just gone, but unreachable. I knew something had been there once, but the space it occupied was sealed, smoothed over. I couldn't even tell if it had been a summer day or winter. Couldn't recall the face of the one beside me. Only the faintest ache remained, the kind you can't quite name. The hum fell silent. The cables lifted away. The officer stepped back, exhaled. You're clear. The bus is clear. You can go. Back outside, the night felt thinner, like the air after a storm. The bus door hissed open. People looked up as I climbed aboard, some with a slow blink of waking, others with a faint smile. One man nodded, almost a bow. A woman mouthed something that looked like, "Thank you," though I'd never seen her before. I slid into my seat, the engine rumbling underfoot. I pulled my passport from my coat to check the stamps, to reassure myself I still had it. The page with the officer's mark was different. The ink shimmered faintly, as if lit from beneath, the seal's lines pulsing once before settling still. We rolled away from the checkpoint, the road opening into darkness. I leaned my head against the cold glass, watching the taillights smear into red ribbons. Travel doesn't just change you. It negotiates.